So for the 4th of July, I made a whole video about America and my prayer for religious revival in our nation because we desperately need it. And just today, actually, the YouTuber Whatifalthist, who I've covered before on the channel, released a video called The Four Religions Fighting Over America. And I thought, man, that really works really well with the video I just made. So I was like, this would fit really well with it. And I've been meaning to cover Whatifalthist again because he makes a lot of videos that are really right up my alley because he talks a lot about religion and philosophy and the future and stuff. And that's all stuff I've really always been very interested in. And I wanted to give you all another video also because I'm getting ready to go away. Not too long, but I'm going to a mission trip in West Virginia, to help fix up some stuff. And, keep me in your prayers. We can need all the prayer we can get. But I won't be making videos for probably over a week, at least a week, if not more. So, keep me in your prayers inside my trip. And I wanted to make y'all one more video before I left because I really am very appreciative of the folks who keep watching this channel and are regular supporters. So thank y'all so much. And I want to give y'all one more video before I leave. So the way this is going to work, I've already started this video like 12 minutes in because he was pretty much setting up like a introductory to his whole like 4 different religions. And then I'm just going to watch the whole segment. And then at the end of these segments, I'm just going to give my 2 cents, at least for the first 3. And that's how it's going to work. So
Darwinists at 10% of the population. This is a philosophy which, in my opinion, should be vastly larger. That since Darwinism at this point is an almost universally agreed upon principle that we use in science, I'm always shocked how little people use Darwinism as a lens of human analysis. That being said, there's an obvious reason why this is the case, in that Darwinism effectively became a heretical religion due to a certain Austrian painter, and for the last 80 years, anyone who propounded a worldview, even adjacent to it, was mass persecuted by the entire world. If you look back upon the time since Charles Darwin and see how little our worldview has incorporated Darwinism, it would come across as completely insane. Our entire society is a direct rejection of Darwinism. Even if you say something as completely innocuous or obvious, like that Europe conquered the world since some part of its society was superior to the rest of the planet, you could have your entire life ruined. Our current social sciences or theory of the world literally doesn't have any philosophic structure for superiority or competence. If you succeed, it's since you must be oppressive, not since you're better in any way. That being said, we all know that's ridiculous. We all know that some people are better at some things than others. And the thing is that I think this is all intentional, in that the left realized that Darwinism created an intractable ideological issue which would destroy their entire ideology. Thus, the left made Darwinism completely taboo to discuss on any single level, closing the academy to even the slightest hinting of it, since I think they realize on a subconscious level that they didn't have an answer to it. The Darwinists are the evil group our society is allied against, thus being the social outsiders. This is both the greatest strength and the greatest weakness of the Darwinists. Partly, it keeps them from growing or attaining elite power, except until some point in the future, but also at the same point, since the ruling class is failing so hard as society is collapsing, the Darwinists' hands are completely clean of the previous social failures. Darwinism hasn't been tested enough recently for it to be obvious to the next generation of young people what its failings are. Thus, it can appear fresh or new. Darwinism is currently in a place of flexibility in which it hasn't coalesced into being a complete new ideology. The biggest reason people enter the Darwinistic worldview is since, for as long as anyone can remember, the regime has used the Nazis as the bogeyman to avoid and unify society against. The problem implicit in that is that as the regime has treated its own subjects worse and worse, it removes any incentive for thinking, why not be a Nazi? Darwinism is the smallest of these philosophies now and the least developed, but I expect it to make incredible surges in the near future, perhaps becoming the dominant philosophy. I say this partly for the reason I mentioned before, that as the regime grows weaker, the Darwinists stand to gain massively. Secondly, the advances in genetic scientific science over the 21st century have proven things that the regime's right to rule is completely false. Anyone in the sciences today of any political stripe agrees that biological race is real, that genetics amount to at least half of personality, going down to things like political affiliation, how fast you drive, or what music you listen to. We've completely proven that social class, ethnicity, and sex have genetic components. Every year we find that genetics is more and more important. The regime is holding an ideological line which is just insane. Here are a bunch of books written by leftists or socialists that talk about all these points. Since the regime shuts down reasonable discussion of these topics, that means that when people take the red pill and start questioning the regime, the Darwinists take them in. The third reason is that with the new discoveries in genetic engineering, which have the potential to create godlike abilities, including changing the fabric of life itself, is that the temptation to use said technology will probably become overwhelming, and the only way that you could explain it in a comprehensible worldview is through the lens of Darwinism and improving genetics. Darwinism is based upon the idea that the world is a violent and brutal place of continuous warfare and competition, that our blood determines who we are, and that human nature is ingrained, not malleable. I think the most advanced Darwinistic thinker today is Kurt Doolittle, who has pushed the philosophic principles of Darwinism to their logical conclusion. Bronze Age Pervert is another advanced Darwinist thinker who has taken more so from the Nietzschean classical bent on this topic. The new right is currently stuck between Darwinists and Christians fighting each other, often covertly under the surface, and it's completely unclear which of them the movement will eventually go after. Something a lot of you might not realize is that the red pill is the biggest gateway to Darwinism. Entire generations of young men realized what they were told about women while they grew up was a complete lie, mostly from their own personal experiences. Then they started learning about female nature, which inevitably leads to studies in genetics or human nature in general. Of the four religions, Darwinism appeals to young men or the fighters of society the best. Without a religion balancing it out, Darwinism naturally worships vitality. Vitality is a sort of vague principle that glory or great action is the meaning of life. Nietzsche is the real prophet of the Darwinist worldview. The problem here is that most people's lives are fundamentally boring and non-glorious. Society is mostly NPCs who, if they don't get a place in that society, will defect from the system. Darwinism is a direct reaction to the life-hating, envious, and egalitarian nature of our society, which young men are understandably rebelling against. One of the biggest issues that Darwinists run into is the inability to develop mindfulness or the conflation of brutality and practicality. For an example of this from the Second World War, the Nazis and Japanese, whenever they faced a challenge, just doubled down on aggression, which makes sense from their worldview, which glorifies vitality. That being said, this was retarded since they ended up declaring war on a coalition of the most powerful countries in the world, with 20 times their population at the exact same time. At the same time, a lot of Darwinism is just a rationalization for killing people. This ends up in weird places where lots of Darwinists will say, we need to kill those ethnic minorities or invade this country for our people to survive. The problem is that's not actually true, and being aggressive all the time is a terrible strategy. A nimble strategic thinker realizes that there are times for flattery, selling out, cowardice, cooperation alongside courage, aggression, or dominance. If you look at successful empires over history, they always find carrots and sticks to induce cooperation with the conquered. Great empires do as much of their governing through indirect diplomacy as through violence. Darwinists don't do this. If the Japanese or Germans found ways to cooperate with the conquered, which is not unimaginable since at the start of World War II, most of Eastern Europe preferred the Nazis to Stalin, or the Chinese have cooperated with foreign conquerors for thousands of years. This is also true on an international scale, where everyone else teamed up against fascism because it was so overtly aggressive that people realized they couldn't trust it. If the Darwinists lose this time, it will be for the very same reason. That being said, we live in what's probably the least wise age of history. People only see the outward trappings of ideas, not what they actually mean. This is how the left, a suicidal nihilistic death cult, was able to take over all of society because we only saw their front of being kind and caring, not the reality of what they were even publicly, literally saying. I've seen the Darwinists do a good job of putting up a new front of not being Nazis Nazis. As a figure on the right, I know a lot of these people, and normies don't believe me when I say that there are legit Nazis on the right, but there are. The irony is that this is 100% the left's fault for pushing people to this. I see a lot of people on the right who have a worldview which is literally 95% similar to Nazism, but since they gave it a new name, people don't notice. I think that this movement will see the rise of a new leader in the next few years. I don't think anyone understands how big a sentiment there is here, and it just needs said leader. I frankly don't think any of the figures so far have this capability, and that people like Nick Fuentes or Bronze Age Pervert have designed their brands to be memes, not serious people. That being said, it only takes one Hitler, but once he shows up, everything changes. It's not an uncommon sentiment on the right to believe that we should construct a racial caste system based off race and IQ. Even if it's not that big a platform, expect it to grow exponentially every single year. Before leftists get all self-righteous, keep in mind your people have unironically turned society into a racial caste system, and your moderates haven't called them out. The left has no clue at the demon they made, similarly to how the Nazis formed as a reaction to the insanity of Weimar leftists. The Darwinists will make tough and brave fighters too. The greatest issue the Darwinists face is nihilism. A principle I've developed is that if you believe in God or the soul, you're not a nihilist, and if you don't, you are. This is since the soul disposes a sense of inherent meaning independent from the material. The Darwinists generally LARP as Christians, but they actually are the least Christian of any of these factions, in that literally, if you tell them about Christ's teachings and compare their philosophy to it, they will mock them while they pretend to be Christians as a code, much like the Nazis. The Darwinists are obsessed with aesthetics, in a reaction to the ugly monotony of our culture. That being said, they use glory as a way to get around a meaningful universe. I prefer that to most other ways people cope with the death of God, but it does inevitably result in pushing unhuman cruelties and authoritarianism. That being said, if you push them on if they believe any values, you won't really get an answer. Everything in their worldview is a rationalization for pushing their self-interest, which is something a lot of they themselves would agree with. The thing that Darwinists really need is a soul and God. Without that, they spiral, and with it, they can hold themselves to moral standards. If you don't believe in the soul or divine, killing other people to bring about utopia is the rationally correct endpoint to reach. Ironically, the Darwinists with religion is literally what the entirety of pre-modern history looks like. Hey everybody, for a brief pause, you guys should check out my second channel, History 102, where Eric Torenberg and I explain various events in history, and we have 16 episodes so far where we go through the Middle Ages, the fall of Rome, the World Wars, and explaining history in easy 1-hour segments. Number 2, machine worship.
I guess I should have paused it earlier, but anyways, you know, Darwinism before the Nazis was actually the biggest opposition to Christianity. Like, if you go back in time, from 1859, when The Origin of Species came out, to 1945, the end of World War II, Darwinism was the biggest force against Christianity in the West. If you look back at the late 19th century, early 20th century, Darwinism took over the intellectual sphere and became the dominant force against Christianity. You know, the Scopes monkey trial, which happened almost 100 years ago now, is incredibly meaningful because it really was this, you know, this big sign of the fight between Darwinism, which was the force competing to take over academia and all society, and Christianity. World War II, you know, it was just the end of Darwinism. You know, it was just really the setback of Darwinism. But it wasn't just the Nazis that did awful things with Darwinist logic. Planned Parenthood, for instance, the whole foundation of that movement is in Darwinism. And YouTube won't let me get into in depth about some of the things that Darwinists did inside their golden age, their heyday, but they did some pretty messed up stuff to all kinds of different types of people in the name of creating superior races and natural selection and survival of the fittest. They did a lot of very bad things in the name of survival of the fittest. And it really is the polar opposite of Christian teaching, because Jesus says quite clearly in the Sermon on the Mount, you know, blessed are the poor, blessed are the meek. You know, he always, you know, Jesus is a gospel of the least. He's with the least of these. He's with the lesser. And that's quite the opposite of Darwinism. But out of all these ideologies he talks about, Darwinism actually is the one I'm most afraid of, because it appeals to young men. And what we're really seeing right now, Now, young women matter a lot too. Ladies out there, y'all matter. But what we're seeing right now, especially in the online world, is we are seeing a fight for the souls of young men, and especially the right, which is getting most of the young men right now. It is a fight between Darwinism and Christianity. And I think after Marxism falls away, which I think is going to happen soon, I think we're going to go back to where we were before World War II, where it is Christianity versus Darwinism as the dominant force. And Darwinism appeals to men particularly because it's very rational, it's very scientific, and I've seen a lot of right wingers. They've tried to, because one of the criticisms of atheism is, where you get your morality from, and it's all made up except for the Darwinists. Now the Darwinists can say there is an objective morality. It's not given to us by a God, but it's given to us by a natural order of things. We can see what works out naturally. And I really do think that atheism, the only way atheism can really work is Darwinism, because Darwinism is the only form of atheism that can give you objective morality. And I do think an individual atheist can be moral because God created a natural law. And even if an atheist doesn't believe in God, he still has that natural law written in his heart. But if you're going to really build a whole society off atheism or deism or just any kind of new religion that's not really based off an old holy book or some writings of some kind of prophet, you're going to try to create some kind of new ideology. Your only real source of objective morality will be Darwinism. And, Darwinism, I do think that the great fight will be between the Darwinists and the Christians. And, Darwinism, as I said before, is it's polar opposite to Christianity because, Darwinism says survival of the fittest. Christianity says that God is on the side of the least of these. And if you are one of the fittest, you need to take care of the least. Christianity teaches an inherent worth and dignity of all people, that all people are made in the image and likeness of God. And that's a fundamental difference because Darwin doesn't take it to its logical extent. You need to get rid of the people that are inferior. And, the Nazis just took Darwinism to its logical end. And, I see a lot of these, I've read, I've listened, I've heard them, and they still teach this kind of stuff, that there are, we need to organize society by, those at the fittest, and that we need to base everything so this natural selection, this race for survival. And, I do agree that natural selection absolutely exists. I've said before, I have no issue with the theory of evolution in my faith, but I'm not against Darwinism, like the biological principles. What scares me is social Darwinism, which was very popular in the late 19th century, early 20th century. Social Darwinism can apply to everything. And social Darwinism is arguably one of the most destructive ideologies of all of history. If you go back to the social Darwinist golden age, social Darwinism was used to justify a lot of terrible things. And seeing the revival of social Darwinism scares me. So now we're going to part two.
At 15% of the population. In fantasy novels there are small orders of mages or secret societies which have massive outsized political or social power but are numerically incredibly small. That's what tech is today. Tech today has an absurd amount of power over the world and society, while at the same time being centered around a handful of social groups driven off particular cultural norms or incentives which are completely alien to the general population. Techno-optimism used to be a widespread and normal sentiment among the population. Look back at the 1950s, where they had all of this science fiction about the incredible technological advances that would occur in the future and how it would make their lives so much easier. This sentiment is largely completely dead among the general public today. If you ask anyone about what technologies they expect, they'll immediately drop a list of dystopian Black Mirror stuff. When tech discovers something new, the populace assume it exists to exploit them. At the same time, that doesn't stop the populace from using whatever technologies Silicon Valley produces. Seeing how rapidly people have accepted AI and started integrating it into their daily lives really shocks me. I told myself I would never use AI, and now I do so all the time. Your average person has a better relationship with their technology than the people in their daily lives. Gen Z spends 7 hours a day on average on just their phones. At the same same time, this change has bred remarkable resentment among the general populace. People hate the new digital world. It's incredibly lonely, sterile, and depressing. The screens are basically as addictive as heroin. Digitization has automated the middle class out of existence, creating the largest dating crisis in history, and allows the near permanent monitoring of the population. I have a lot of friends in technology, and it's so strange to talk to them in that they are constantly talking about how powerful the tech industry is, and also what new things they're about to discover. Meanwhile, I have to frequently tell them, you guys are aware the general public is always about a week from burning you all on the stake. That being said, I'm making the claim here that tech has become a new religion. Not that it's just a powerful social force. The reason I believe this is that if you talk to people in technology, they have a remarkable faith in the idea that technology will bring about the rapture. That sounds insane to tell normal people, but there is a very powerful, kind of secret cult in tech, which unironically believes that we are on the verge of a complete breakthrough in world history, which has no parallel ever. This idea animates almost all of the great men in technology in one form or another, whether Mark Zuckerberg, Sam Altman, or Elon Musk. It's called the singularity, or that artificial intelligence will hit a rate of exponential growth in which it breaks human history, ushering in a completely new era. Look this up. It's a very popular theory, which has had many books written about it. Almost all important figures in this field have written about it, and there are loads of serious books which treat the singularity as a real coming event, which will certainly change the course of the future in ways that we can't understand. As a historian, I chuckle at this, since by studying history, I've come to realize that there are certain archetypes in human behavior which you see repeated again and again in different garbs. These are edged into the human condition, and certain eras of history rationalize them with whatever logic their society uses. One being the rapture, or a point where we will reach a spiritual breakthrough in which those who follow said religion are saved while the world completely changes. For the techies, their singularity is the rapture. These are people who treat religion as silly, but they've so easily slipped into their own version. A constant theme we'll find with all of these religions, except the final, is they lack a tremendous amount of self-awareness, and so end up acting out principles of human nature, which are far more primitive than the sheen they put on. Ironically, they have no idea they're doing it. Artificial intelligence may have tremendous effects upon the world. In fact, it almost certainly will, but to expect it to completely alter every element of humanity is just insane. Look at the most inventions in world history, whether the Industrial Revolution, nuclear bombs, agriculture, or metalworking. What happens in each case is that there are a couple major variables which change, but the messy nature of the world in human competition remains. What messianic ideologies say is that the era of suffering in human competition is just going to stop, but that's never going to happen. You also see this across technology, where it appears as if Mark Zuckerberg believes himself to be a god who is creating a new world through virtual reality. Elon is creating Neuralink to fight against the potential issues with AI destroying humanity. Alternately, you see it with some of the most insane people in crypto. Sam Altman wants to have machines replace humanity, and that's not an uncommon sentiment in a lot of these tech people, of creating a more perfect creation than humanity through the machine who will move past us in evolution. Yuval Noah Harari has talked a lot about this. In each case, they believe their technologies are going to usher in a utopia right around the corner. The utopia thesis has been tested for a very long time over history, and every single time it fails. In fact, the utopians make things vastly worse in almost every case. The thing that scares you at the tech industry is it's filled with people who view context, barriers, human nature, and natural ecosystems with contempt. They want to rip everything up. They don't hold themselves to any standard. This leads to a worldview capable of profound evil, since the great totalitarians of the past share every single one of those traits with them. They hold human nature in no kind of sacredness. That being said, tech is a double-sided coin, which in addition to this has incredible promise to change the world in a very positive way. One of those is that the internet will probably allow the defeat of the current wave of authoritarianism or totalitarianism authoritarianism flowing across the world since it allows easy non-government communication and cooperation. This is the populist world that has been created by the internet. We used to be completely dependent upon TV stations, which were curated by elites in the government. My friend Balaji has turned me around on a lot of points in this topic. He splits the world into grays, reds, and blues, which is a split I like enough that I'll probably make a video about it at some point, which are conservatives, leftists, and technologists. The advantage I see in tech is decentralization, and it has the smartest and most creative people of any of these religions by a significant margin. Tech is also the most innovative and creative in that it has the greatest ability to just invent something totally new, which changes the game. Tech has potential to pop up anywhere in the world, as we've seen in El Salvador. Due to how decentralized it is, it's not unimaginable to see random third world countries become new centers for tech if they try hard enough or if they're pushed out of the first world. Tech is divided between decentralized and centralized tech. Decentralized tech is largely a tool of authoritarian governments and has lost a lot of creativity. China or even the World Economic Forum are great examples of that, in that the WEF is a fusion between machine worship and leftism. We're currently in a race between tech as a force for freedom or servitude. I really do worry about AI being a tool of state surveillance as a great example. The biggest weakness in tech is its complete disconnection from reality and human nature. When I talk to people in tech, it always shocks me to see how split off they are from the public sentiment, often to an incredibly embarrassing degree. Their arrogance makes them hated and increases the chances they just get slaughtered by the general populace. The reason capitalism was so rare in history, only really flowering in Western Europe, is that it's too easy for government to just ally with the mob to steal money from the capitalists. This has happened dozens of times in history. Also, the god that tech pushes is fundamentally false. Firstly, I very rarely see people in tech push for things that the general populace wants. Almost everything big tech creates is to push their power. Secondly, the tech ideas they have just won't make the world a utopia. It will probably make things a lot worse. The singularity will never happen, and if it does, it will probably be pushing some cynical agenda. Their idea is that you can just engineer your way out of human nature, which is wrong. Also, tech has become rapidly a lot less creative, where they put up this facade of creativity, and they're still probably the most creative of any of these religions, but their amount of creativity has collapsed precipitously in the last decade, as has their ability to think independently, where San Francisco is now one of the least free-thinking places in America. Tech will do its best if it stays in a small scale based off actually inventing stuff. The raw creative ability of this group is remarkable if tapped. That being said, they again need to have a soul, or that they serve some broader human agenda rather than rationalize an inchoate drive for power. Tech is one of the few places that actually makes new stuff in our society, which is largely boring and uncreative and sterile. If we lose tech, we're probably slated for another dark age. Number 3, Marxists at a quarter of the...
Okay, so there's a lot to be said about tech and tech worship. I'm a bit of a Luddite myself, so most of my generation's like very tech savvy. I'm probably the least tech savvy Gen Z are you ever going to meet. It's honestly a miracle I'm running a YouTube channel. Like, I really do not know much about tech, and that's an intentional lifestyle choice. I've intentionally tried to be as uninvolved with the grid as possible. I try not to be too involved with social media. The only social media I have is YouTube. And I try to stay away from it all because I think it's bad for your soul. And really, my problem with the tech worship is the soul itself. We just know that you look at all these different statistics, and I think people can see it with their own eyes. You look back 20 years ago, and you look at our society today. I'm not saying 2004 with a utopia, but if you look at our society in 2004 and you look at it now, it's insane. And the biggest thing that changed was the smartphone and the massive takeover of social media in our society. And I mean, it's just had so many horrible effects on our very souls and our very being. That, and I completely agree with him. It's so refreshing to see somebody else pointing out the singularity is complete BS. There will be no singularity. AI will never become sentient because you have to have a soul to be sentient, and God will not give a machine a soul. And of course, these people are all materialists, and they think that they can just hit a bunch of random buttons and wire something a certain way, and they'll somehow get something that it's sentient, but sentience is God breathed, and it isn't going to happen. There will be no singularity. If it does happen, it will only be in God's will. But I really don't think it will happen. I really don't see that inside the God we read inside the Bible. I don't think that man can create something that will become sentient. And I mean, that's simple as that. I mean, if you believe in a God, I mean, if there is a God, which of course I argue all the time, there is one from objective mystical evidences and things, but I'll talk about that a bit later in this very video. But yeah, tech worship I think is just one of the dangerous religions. I get sick of it because I'm a bit of a nerd, even though I'm a Luddite. So I do sometimes look into science stuff, and I get so tired of being like, oh, the singularity was only a few years away, and we're going to like cybernetically, so it's going to be like human evolution all over again. First, we're going to become cyborgs, and then we're eventually going to transition to full-out robots. And a lot of these people just hate humanity, and it's just honestly, I mean, my honest opinion, a lot of those big tech guys, like the big tech CEOs, the famous tech people, a lot of them are just creeps, man. So yeah, tech worship is, I mean, I just think it's completely unrealistic. I don't think technology will save us. In fact, technological innovation has been slowing down since the 19th century. Like, if you look at how much the world changed between 1800 and 1899, it's rather insane. And then the world changed also a lot between 1900 and 1999, but I really don't think we're going to see similar levels of change between 2000 and 2099. I really don't see that. Technological innovation is massively slowing down. Most of what we have in this century is mostly just an improvements on what was made until the late 20th century. So, I mean, by the late 20th century, we already had the internet and all those things. These are just improvements built upon it. And I really do think that technological innovation will massively slow down and perhaps even grind to a halt, for the most part at least. So yeah, I don't think tech worship is. I mean, it just completely ignores the existence of a soul. And a lot of these people, they have a God complex. I've listened to some of what they say. A lot of them, I was listening to some like the World Economic Forum. I remember one fellow. He talked about intelligent design, but he wasn't talking about God making the world kind of intelligent design. He said he even mocked that idea. When I say intelligent design, I'm not saying about some God. I'm talking about us making a robot. And I mean, it's nonsense. They cannot make a soul, and they completely ignore the soul. They worship machinery and hate the flesh. And the flesh, you need to hate the flesh for its sinful nature, but they hate our bodies. They hate humanity. Tech worship and this modern techno age, it's so anti-human. It's completely against our nature. In fact, we completely hate nature. I mean, some few people have any connection with the natural world. Of course, I talked a lot about this in my video, The New Tower of Babel. So go watch that if you're interested by some of the things I've said.
Of the population. This story is so unbelievably bizarre that I think our descendants will struggle to believe that it was ever real. Communism was the ideology which killed the most people in human history. By a truly vast margin, it was tried in every single continent, climate, and civilization. It killed more people than every other religion and ideology in history combined. Then after that, they changed their name and were able to quietly take over the institutions of the entirety of Western civilization. The West didn't even really put up a fight, sacrificing its economy, culture, romance, religion, foreign policy, or literally anything else you could possibly imagine without even realizing it was happening. This degree of idiocy should not be physically possible. However, that didn't stop it from happening. I'll explain later why I think it occurred. That being said, we live in a society which is run by Marxists. Every single institution that exists has been co-opted by Marxists. This is the case for Hollywood, TV, the media, the government bureaucracy, corporations, the upper brass of the military, the police, schools, academia, philosophy, religion, and literally anything else. They have turned the entire hiring process into racial discrimination against the majority population. Every single facet of our social code has been melded under Marxist philosophic assumptions. You know a cultural form has been really important when its assumptions are so baked into a culture that people don't even think about them. For example, our idea of the underdog being good stems from Marxism. The idea that all people are equal, diversity is good, the sexes being interchangeable, or the government should take care of the populace all stem from Marxism. Communists will seethe at me saying this, but the US has a hybrid socialist economy since the US government makes half of the US's as a country's total economy. The Marxists did this largely through verbal games. The communists maintain the exact same worldview as they had before, in which the oppressed need to launch a revolution to bring about utopia. That being said, they changed out the working classes for women, sexual, and ethnic minorities. This was since the white working class was wealthy enough that they actually became satisfied with their material conditions. Meanwhile, the groups above keep on asking for more no matter what they get. Our society is foolish enough that we didn't even notice. The Marxists kept changing definitions so that people never realized what was happening. We were indoctrinated through leftist-dominated media and schools not to notice. The Marxists socialized the populace to be NPCs who wouldn't see what was occurring right before their own eyes. The left is completely evil. I used to feel bad saying that, but after watching the actions of the last few years, I've seen the left completely trash every single moral standard they could have held themselves to. They've become the party of the rich, the powerful, they shut down dissent, they're trying to commit social suicide. I have a game of trying to find a single moral degeneracy that the mainstream left hasn't defended. It's impossible. Mainstream leftist media have written positively of pedophilia, mass castration, a racial caste system, and have written against thinking for yourself or having children. The reason I think all of this happened, personally, is that we're living through Mouse Utopia. Mouse Utopia was an experiment in the 60s, which I made a video about, where they gave the mice perfect conditions to breed, and then after their numbers going up massively, the mouse social structure completely fell apart. Male mice became effeminate, female mice aggressive, the mice stopped having children, became autistic. Mouse society completely collapsed as bands of thugs destroyed the mice who continued to breed. Even if you don't believe in that experiment, historically, periods of wealth or decadence allow societies to stop behaving in productive ways and instead be degenerate. What's happened here is the left won since they were able to create an easy rationalization for complete degeneracy and social collapse to be morally okay. Imagine what kind of ideology those mice would make up to justify Mouse Utopia. Wouldn't it end up looking a lot like wokeness? Wokeness is making a turn now from kinda positive ideology about empowering oppressed groups to legit death cult bent on social suicide. You can see this in that the left is pushing more and more so for stuff like not having children, deindustrialization to stop climate change, suicide, mass immigration to destroy developed countries, the end of heterosexuality, or other things which are exactly what group would do to rationalize. The left has become completely possessed by what is effectively the worship of Mother Nature, as you can see with their obsession with the planet or environmentalism or the noble savage. In the esoteric tradition, the negatives of Mother Nature are chaos, irrationality, and an inchoate desire to destroy for its own sake, to make the world more simple, thus allowing future creativity. The left's main goal is suicide. You can see that now the Western left picks different issues to be suicidal about. In the US, they pick African slavery. In the settler colonial countries, which didn't have slavery like Canada or Australia, they pick indigenous issues. In the countries the Europeans are native to, they pick climate change or colonialism. In each case, they pick whatever rationalization works for suicide. This is the great weakness of the left, that they are completely insane and literally want to lose. The left is killing itself. The left doesn't do anything anymore. They don't develop new ideas, have kids, make culture or art, have new philosophies, make companies. The great worry is that the left brings down their entire civilization with them as they fall. The left's great strength is they have all of the organs of society and have a fanatical base of supporters who will die for them. This battle, in my opinion, will rupture into legitimate wars in the Western world over the next few years between the right and the left. Number 4, Christians at half of...
Okay. Well, starting with that statistic about Christians, I'll talk about it in just a minute, but his whole, half the population's Christian. I would say most certainly for my generation, at least half the population is Marxist or communist. And, we make fun of people in the 50s all the time because they were so scared of communists and communists were going to take over, but yet it happened. Communists have completely taken over our society, our media, our government, our religion, literally everything. I mean, not literally everything, but most things, 80% of things at least. All major institutions, the long march through the institutions have been taken over by Marxists or communists or whatever you want to call them, to the point where it has become the majority religion in this country. And this video is a bit more political, if you haven't noticed in the others, because this is kind of a bit more political, these religions. But I mean, it's funny what he said about the working class, because communism started out as a working class religion. And while I was sitting here thinking about it, I realized the reason why the communists have absolutely turned on the working class is the modern communism, in fact, the Soviet communists, they backed up our kind of communists, here in America, the woke people. And they called them useful idiots, the Soviets, because the Soviets, they were actually, they would call them bigots today because, the Soviets had a complete ban on abortion, for instance, complete ban on homosexuality. They'd be considered actually quite right wing on social issues, and they actually call it the American communists useful idiots. But then, of course, the Soviet Union fell, and the American communists, the Western communists, are all that's left. And I was saying about the working class, and the reason why they hate the working class, common people, blue collar people, brown collar people, is because people who actually work for a living and are salty the earth kind of folks, they're actually in tune with reality. They understand what's going on. Meanwhile, they call them champagne socialists. Most of the people who push this kind of thing are rich people who have never worked a day in their life, who are rich as can be, and they're guilty, and they feel guilty because of it. And instead of course, turning to the Lord for their sins, they fix it by being, super left wing and being like, oh, I'm supporting this and that. It's all champagne socialism. It's all, I heard a really interesting theory that, in the past, before mass production, the rich folks, they would show off having all this fancy stuff. And they still do that today, but increasingly it's degeneracy because, for instance, rich people, they can much easier have a bunch of partners and pull it off, opposed to poor folks. And what they do is that they show off how degenerate they are, or they can believe these most insane opinions because they have the resources, they have the wealth, they have the privilege. Meanwhile, more common folks, they can't, they really can't believe and practice some of the crazy stuff about rich folks. In fact, what we've learned is that the rich, they actually, I know I'm talking a lot about the rich, but it's so funny. Communism has gone from being an ideology of the poor man to overthrow the rich man to really it has become the ideology of the rich man to control the poor man. The rich have completely changed communism. They've completely made it a whole new thing to really benefit themselves. And that's what the Soviet politicians did. They just made themselves the ruling class. And that's essentially what's happened. Communism is a populist movement, but it's always been co-opted by people who want power. And what's happened in America is that the rich and others have co-opted communism as a way of power. And, I could speak a lot about communism. It's the deadliest religion ever, killed so many in the 20th century. And it is killing our society now because they're all nihilist. And, I do worry because, I am, once again, a biblical universalist. So thankfully, I know that all people will one day be saved. But it is very worrying to me to see so many folks, become communists and, go down the road of communism. And, you just see so many good people, people that could, I wouldn't say good, nobody's good, but you see so many people that are, decent people, and then they go down this road of communism and wokeism, and they get all crazy. Now, I'm not actually purely a right-winger. I would not call myself a right-winger or a conservative. If you give me, I'm actually a person, it depends on the issue. Certain things I'm pretty left-wing on. Other things I'm pretty right-wing. I'm not talking about, Democrat, Republican. Actually, the fullness of the political spectrum. Some stuff I'd be considered pretty left-wing on. But actually sound like a communist if you get me talking about some things, especially stuff like banking. But if you get me on some other stuff, I sound pretty right-wing. And that's because I'm pretty diverse in my thoughts. So I'm not like a right-winger. I would not call myself a conservative. or Republican or anything of that nature. So yeah, it's just, I think communism, it suffers from this, once again, not believing inside a soul. And then all these ideologies, he puts that out into this video. They don't believe inside a soul. They don't believe inside inherent worth and dignity of human beings. And to all these ideologies, human beings are expendable. And I mean, it's all about their power. It's all about this elite group of people controlling everybody else. And they don't view people as people. And I mean, not to say the church is perfect, but I mean, Jesus taught, and he was very clearly on the side of the least of these, the poor, the prisoner, the immigrant, and these other ideologies, they're really on the side of the rich and the powerful.
Of the population. Now for the religion which is by far the largest. Although it may not appear like this, Christians are still demographically dominant in America, forming between 2/3 and 3/4 of the population. I put the real number at 50%, and I think lots of people who say they're Christian, in their hearts, really have another ideology which is actually more important for their thought process. Think of woke churches, for example, or people on the dissident right who are really Darwinists but mask it in Christianity. That being said, over 90% of Americans still believe in God, and similar to slightly lower numbers, pray or are spiritual. This is different from Europe, which is largely turned completely agnostic. Funnily enough, the average American agnostic is more religious in belief in God or prayer than the average European religious person. What this means is that there is a very significant amount of people who are adjacent to Christianity who could be scooped up by a new reformation if it were to occur. Christianity is in a strong, if very precarious position. It's by far the oldest and best tested of these religions, the only one that you can seriously call a religion. It's also the most balanced and intellectually developed. The other ideologies, largely since they lack belief in a soul, lack self-awareness, which creates huge intractable flaws, which eat them alive. For Darwinism, it's their absurd aggression. For communism, it's that their worldview doesn't make sense, they're trying to kill themselves. And for machine worship, is that their technologies can't deliver what they promise. That being said, Christianity has propelled multiple civilizations for thousands of years sustainably. With all that being said, Christianity is a large empire built on weak foundations. It's been declining around the world for centuries, and even more so in the last few decades. Just since the year 2000 until the present, almost all countries in West Europe went from overwhelmingly Christian to something around only a quarter of their population. In America, it went from 90% to 2/3. The church is currently bleeding followers. If things don't change, American Christianity could be dead by the end of our lives. Another interesting trend is that over history, even with majority Christian populations, small agnostic elites have taken over said societies and then secularized them. This happened with Soviet Russia, Jacobin France, fascist Italy, or Nazi Germany. That is what wokeism is attempting now, and what the other two religions might try. The problem that this runs into is that Christians today are too complacent. Christianity has experienced a profound brain drain over the last few centuries. In the medieval or early modern periods, the greatest minds, whether St. Augustine, Isaac Newton, Thomas Aquinas, or Descartes, served the church. Recently, those people have gone into business, politics, or science. This has resulted in the church constantly being outmaneuvered by other institutions. This is why Christians haven't been able to adapt to the new scientific world. Christian theology is stuck in the pre-industrial world, which makes it unrelatable to the general public. The greatest issue Christianity faces is that a large part of the population literally finds it impossible to believe in. The intellectual view of the world modernity has openly doesn't believe in any non-material things, like God or spirits. Most people take this completely for granted. Until that variable changes, the world's religions will continue to decline. With all this said, changing the public's view on this, making them believe in a spiritual ideal dimension, would be one of the most important intellectual breakthroughs in history. I personally, and I know I'm biased on this topic due to my research in this area, think there will be an intellectual breakthrough towards belief in the spirit world that will take place this century. That being said, I think even if the evidence was irrefutable, most people would reject it for a very long time. Getting it to become a new consensus would take centuries. The fundamental foundations of most people's worldview are so mechanistic on a really deep level. Christianity will keep losing in a mechanistic worldview against the other three. The people who tend to be left in Christianity after all of this are the soft-hearted and those who love tradition. These kinds aren't the sort of people who usher in great advances or fight other ideologies. This has been self-reinforcing as the church becomes more of a white bread place for nice guys. The church runs into issues in which, since it tells its followers to follow their moral code, even when it results in them losing, Christians get constantly outmaneuvered. Christians today are completely incapable of realpolitik, cynicism, and power politics. You often see Christians come across as overly sincere and cringe when they try to get involved in these fields, or they come across as completely out of touch with reality. Christians often end up projecting their own attitudes upon their enemies, thus making their enemies' cynicism and power hungriness completely unrecognizable. Christianity today is pretty cucked, with the church being feminized. The amount of young men attending church has halved since the start of the 21st century, since it's just not masculine enough. That being said, there has been a push to make Christianity more masculine, as we've seen with the Jesus lifting culture, guns and God culture, or figures like Jordan Peterson. Christianity, ironically, is the opposite issues of all the groups above, in that they err by being too cynical about a concept of the soul to give them internal direction. For Christians, is that they're too motivated by an internal sense of righteousness. If you look at the worst Christian fundamentalist states over history, whether Puritan New England, Franco's Spain, or Savonarola's dictatorship in Florence, you find that it's pretty tame compared to fascism or communism, in which the Christians maintained independence for the family, the society, very rarely had drafts, and there's not as much totalitarian interference in every single facet of life. Thus, in summary, if Christianity doesn't do anything, it will continue to decline into irrelevance. That being said, I think of all of these, Christianity has the highest potential for winning, largely since Christianity has proven itself to be incredibly strong, or, as people say, lindy over its history, preferably by having some kind of internal revolution to make it more adaptable to the modern world. Christianity has proven itself time and time again at being incredibly inventive and malleable. This would be the most in character for Christianity to do of any world religion. Another important detail is that with the population crash which is occurring, the religious are forming a vastly disproportionate amount of those who are procreating and continuing the next generation. For educated people, this is even more extreme, in which literally the only educated people who are having children are the religious. This means that our society will basically have to become religious over the next 50 years. The real question is, what religion will they end up following? Eras of harshness like ours tend to push religion, since people need meaning in a difficult world that makes no sense. Of these four, Christianity has the best track record of giving people mental models which actually help them live with their lives. All of the other three effectively outsource behavior to the state or elites. It's their job to build a utopia so you can be happy, not that you have to change your life to live a happy life as an individual. With all that said, I'm still putting the highest bet on Christianity, but I don't want Christians to get complacent. Keep in mind your religion is still collapsing at record historic rates in your home countries. Most people can't bring themselves to believe in traditional religions, even if they wanted to. If the natural order suggests we will become religious over the next few centuries, it's totally possible that completely new variations emerge, maybe descended from the other three ideologies. The world is a crazy place and is never going to be what you think. In my opinion, the most likely victor is in fact some combination of these ideologies. Darwinism and Christianity is an easy shot. We've already seen machine worship and Marxism combine in the ruling ideology of our society. Except for Marxism and Christianity, which can't combine due to both having belief structures which openly exclude the other, I find the combination of Darwinism and Marxism hard to believe, given once you believe in Darwinism, leftism makes no sense. That being said, the left has proven they don't care about logical inconsistencies in their their worldview. I mean, my short answer for who will win this religious war is probably no one. Anyone who fills this void will have to adapt into something new. By the process of winning, these ideologies would evolve into something completely different. Imagine a world where Christianity really became a new state religion, where spiritual technology or exorcism are back. That's what a Christian victory as a total new worldview would have to look like. That's completely unrecognizable to Presbyterian churches today. Just imagine if you showed up and told Marx about what his ideology evolved into today, being this corporate, enabling for losers, very wealthy ruling class. Keep in mind, we are players in this game. The result is still up to us. Are you ready to play?
Okay, so interesting video. So I'll finish up with my thoughts on the Christian segment. Well, he had a lot to say, and I agree with a lot of his assessment in the church. I definitely think one of the biggest issues in the church right now is appealing to young men. And the reason why that matters particularly is that men tend to determine the faith of the household. So studies have proven this. If the father converts, for instance, there's like a 70% likelihood the whole household will convert. And for every other person, it's massively lower. Um, and as I said before, there's really the big fight over young men between Christians and Darwinists. But I'll get to that in just a minute. As for some of the other stuff, I completely agree. I think one of the biggest issues with Christianity is just the brain drain. We have lost, we used to have so many intellectual minds in the church, even into the 19th century. But the 20th century, we just completely lost it. We lost the schools, like all the big Ivy League schools, Harvard, Yale, or even go up to Europe, stuff like Oxford or Notre Dame. All those used to be Christian. But we've completely lost the schooling system. We've completely lost just all the smart people, to be honest. I mean, I was looking back in history, like even into the 19th century, most of the major scientists were Christian. But, we get to the 20th century and most scientists are now agnostic and atheists to the point where now we just assume if we see a major scientist that he's probably an atheist. And we really have lost the intellectual side of our faith. And that's massively not great for us because smart people really help us. I mean, you go back to the early church folks like Origen and Augustine were incredibly important. Smart people really help us, spread our faith and adapt our faith. And I mean, I'm a populist, so I'm a strong believer in even religion. I think that lay people have such an important role to play. I'm definitely not an elitist, but even I can't ignore the importance of smart people inside your faith. And also, he was definitely correct that, Christianity has lost a lot of ground. I definitely think that I've experienced it myself because I've talked with a lot of people about Christianity, and there really are just people that just cannot believe it because we live inside such a materialistic world. Materialism is like all three of those ideologies, they fundamentally share something in common, the non-Christian ones, and that is that they're all materialist. They all believe that there's just a material world, there is no soul, there is no God, there is no heaven, there is no hell. That's it. That's what they believe. They're all materialistic. They all start out with the same materialistic framework to reality, and then they just draw different conclusions. And, so many people, they're just so blinded. And, this is what always gets me so happy about being a universalist, and that is I know that somehow, someday, and of course I've taught many times that this does not discourage evangelism because hell is an awful place, and, God loves people, Jesus loves people, and who doesn't want to know Jesus as their Savior in this life? But I always, because there's so many people out there, like all three of those groups, I'm not going to lie, there's some people in there that my more sinful side absolutely despises. And, I haven't had the nicest thoughts about some of these people. And I just feel such peace in knowing that one day, by God's grace and Christ's cross, that eventually we'll all be at peace with each other. And that people that that are enemies to me, one day we're going to be brothers and sisters in Christ. And it's just so beautiful. It's just, you see so much hate and so much negativity in our world today. And knowing there will eventually be peace and all be well, God will be all in all, it is incredibly wonderful. And just fills me with so much peace, knowing that one day there will be, peace, really. As for kind of where I think Christianity, because you talked about Christianity, it's become so weak and effeminate, and I completely agree. It's become so, what do you say, milk toast, white toast, something like that. White bread. Okay, white bread. Yeah. It's become so white bread, and I do think that there's two major movements rising up. I think appealing to young men. What we're really seeing right now is the trad movement, and this is the traditionalist movement, being more traditional, and it's predominantly happening inside the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church. But now we're also seeing a strong movement of conservative Protestants. I think probably the groups with the best chances are Anglicans and Lutherans. Um, but we're seeing this massive rise of conservative traditional Christians, and for starters, they have the intellectual side. This is a much more intellectual form of Christianity than modern day evangelical Christianity. They have more historical rudeness, which is very important because history helps back up things. Also, they really appeal to young men. It's very masculine. It's a very masculine form of religion, and it appeals to masculinity, and that's very important. And I really do think this. I already made a video at the beginning of this year called I think it's called like Trad Takeover or something. But I really do think that trads or traditionalists or whatever you want to call them will become the predominant form of Christianity in our country. I think at some point. I think that it's just very clear this is where the future is heading. I think this is very conservative, very traditional form of religion. I think there will be some massive improvements because of this. For starters, much more beautiful worship. They have much more reverence for the worship and the sacraments. Also, they're much more intellectual, which I think is a good thing. I think Orthodoxy really could be a big winner in this. When I look at the Orthodox Church in America today, I think of the Catholic Church 200 years ago in our country. Though Catholicism is now the largest church in America by far, it used to be very small and very discriminated against, and it was mostly a church of immigrants and stuff. But they organized, and they did benefit a lot from a lot of immigration, but they organized and they gradually gained acceptance in our society. And most of it was immigration. The Catholic Church became so big, but I do think that the Orthodox Church is going to benefit from this. And I really do think Orthodox Christianity become a much larger and more prevalent form of Christianity in America. I also think that conservative Protestantism, the one I've really bet money on is Anglicanism. I think Anglicanism, it really kind of provides a nice middle road between Protestant and Catholic. And I also think Catholicism definitely will be a big winner too. And I mean, this seems to be the future of Christianity in America. I think the other real group that has potential is the Pentecostals, the Charismatics, and that's because they've grown so much over the last 100 years. But Charismatic Christianity, I think what's really appealing about that is that, you know, I think the real reason Pentecostalism is so popular is that we live inside such a dead world. I talked about materialism, and I think Pentecostalism is so appealing because it makes God feel alive. If you go to a Pentecostal service, it's going to feel very lively and very stimulated. And I think that's the big appeal of Pentecostalism. I think a combination of traditionalism with maybe a bit more of like a cessationist focus, focusing a lot more on like that God is alive today, especially inside the Eucharist. I think that's a big selling point. I think that is probably going to be the predominant form of Christianity going forward. And, being a universalist, I do kind of worry a bit because a lot of these people, these trads, are very hostile to the idea of universal salvation. But, the Lord, he'll work his way. And I think that if a lot of people are sincerely studying the Bible and sincerely studying many church fathers, I do think that the Holy Spirit moving can guide people to the good news of universal salvation in Jesus Christ. But I don't know, it's just very interesting. It's also, he also talked about the fertility rate, and I've also talked about this, that religious people are just the only people having babies, which, it's kind of funny thinking about it because atheists will say, oh, well, we can just do what's best for the survival of the human race. But it's the funny thing is that atheists have these insanely low fertility rates. And, I'm just going to close this. But anyways, atheists have these insanely low fertility rates. And it's just funny that atheism, kind of is so anti-life. But one other thing I think he said was real interesting. And that is that he talked about that he thinks that there will be this great spiritual revolution and that evidence for God will become undeniable. But I can tell you that evidence for God is already undeniable. Miracles of the Holy Eucharist. There have been so many miracles of the Eucharist. I've talked with atheists about the Eucharist. We have literal miracles, hundreds of miracles from all across the world, all across hundreds of years, where the Eucharist literally becomes the body and blood of Christ for all to see, all to measure. It's that same DNA and blood type every time. There's also so many healings of the Eucharist, like how Christ healed people. So many people have testimonies of being healed, and it can be documented that they were healed by the Eucharist. And there's so many other things, like just so many Christians can testify in their own personal life that the Eucharist it's changed us. And the same for other things. I know there have been times where like the Eucharist is like glown or something. I know some people have been converted by the Eucharist. Like I know in the Episcopal Church where they have more this free open communion kind of thing. I know people that have been. I've heard of people that they've received the Eucharist and they've converted to Christianity. They were on the fence, but they received the Eucharist and they converted. And there's so many miracles. I was listening to one Catholic priest, and he ended up getting caught up in like going on a prayer. He was an atheist. He got on a prayer retreat with some of his Catholic friends, and he just was there with the Eucharist, and they were praying Eucharistic retreat, and he was converted. And there's just, if you don't believe me, just study it real hard, because there is so much evidences of the Holy Eucharist, and that's undeniable evidence of that Jesus Christ is Lord and Savior. But so few people know it, and there's so many other things. Like I've recently become kind of really interested in exorcists. Now I do not want to be an exorcist. That's a line of duty I don't think I'm called for. Very few people are. But I've been studying a lot about exorcists and demonologists. It's like this stuff all clearly exists. It's not BS. These guys, they're not making it up. They have nothing to gain. A lot of these guys, what do they have to gain? Because a lot of these guys are Catholic priests, and they're not creepy Catholic priests. So they're not having any sex. They're also not making any money off this. They're not exactly getting paid great. So they're not getting sex. They're not getting money. They're not getting fame either. These guys aren't exactly well known either. So it's like, what are they gaining? Of course, I know somebody could say something else, but you go look up exorcists. Like Father Chad Rupert is my favorite. He's such a smart guy. And it's just, and there's so much evidence that God is for real. It's not, like, people be like, oh, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? You show it to them. I've learned this a long time ago that, the Gospels, people saw all these miracles and they still didn't believe. They may have believed the miracles happened, but they didn't believe in him. They didn't believe in Jesus. And that's exactly how it is today. You can show them all the miracles in the world and they won't believe because their hearts are hard. And only the Holy Spirit can change somebody's heart. But as what he said, for a spiritual awakening, the spiritual revival, I think that will happen. I think that there will be some sort of great awakening. And I do think the whole world's going to convert to Christianity at some point. And I think when that does happen, I think we're going to see societal changes that we can't even imagine today. I think really the greatest, for me, what I've seen, like the greatest sign of what could be, what a Christian society could look like, is Quaker Pennsylvania. When the Pennsylvania was ran by the Quakers, you know about Puritan New England. Puritan New England was really fundamentalist, but Quakerism in its prime, it's just this wonderful religion. I'm not a Quaker because I disagree with Quaker views on the sacraments. They don't believe, they believe in baptism and communion, but not in the same way that most Christians do. But Quakerism, they, for instance, like the Indians, they treated the Indians really well. They never had any issues with the Indians. They were pacifists, so they didn't fight. They had so much peace. They were very tolerant of all these different Christian sects and Jews too. And I think Quaker Pennsylvania was such a sign of what could be. And I really think Quakerism, there's so much beauty in Quakerism. It's really a tradition that's so in line with the Spirit. I really do believe that they are very much connected to God and the Spirit. But I really do think that I look back at the book of Acts too, I look at the book of Acts, the early church, things that were going on then. I've talked about this in my other video about Whatifalthist, the CIA, and the spirit world, about the future I think that could happen. I went a bit more in depth, so go watch that video too. But, I really do think when the world converts to Christianity, we're going to see some crazy stuff happen. I think that when this materialist facade we're living under today, I think this excessive materialism is all holding us back. And I think when we forsake it and realize that, God is very much alive and the spiritual world is very much alive, I think there's going to be huge changes. And, I pray for it. I pray for revival. I want to see revival because, I see so many folks as souls, and I just want there to be great revival. Revival like we've never seen before. So I'm still praying for revival. I hope you pray for it too. Thank y'all for watching. I'm not going to be here. I talked about this earlier in the video, but no, I'm not going to be posting for at least a week, if not more. Not 2 weeks, less than 10 days, but probably somewhere between like a week and 10 days. I won't be posting. So, thank you all for everything. Hope you enjoy this long video. And, just thank you all for everything. I really appreciate my loyal followers who, watch all these videos. It really means a lot to me. So thank you all so much. God bless, and keep me in your prayers because I'll be doing work up in West Virginia. Keep us all in your prayers. So thank you all so much, and like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and Christ will conquer.